Skyrim is full of villains who want to end your life, steal your soul, or conquer the world, but some of them can't even manage to be a minor inconvenience. Today, we're ranking the most pathetically failed villains in all of Skyrim, from laughable to legitimately sad, and we're starting with a man so forgettable, I had to double-check he actually existed, Horlak. Let me be clear about something. Most villains on this list at least failed in spectacular fashion. They had a plan, they swung for the fences, and they ate dirt in front of everyone. Horlak didn't even get that far. He is the definition of a villain who simply didn't happen. Here's his entire resume. He's a Nord bandit stationed at Pine Watch, assigned to guard the entrance to a basement sanctuary that houses roughly a dozen other bandits. That's actually a meaningful job. You're the first line of defense, the gatekeeper, the guy who decides who gets in and who gets a sword to the throat. But Horlak treats this responsibility with the energy of a man filling out his 2 weeks' notice. Open your wallet, offer him a bribe, and he steps aside without a fight. No negotiation, no hesitation. Just, yeah, sure, come on in. The entire bandit operation behind him, not his problem anymore. And here's where it gets genuinely hilarious. You can immediately pickpocket the bribe money right back off him. Let that sink in. In a single interaction, Horlak loses his post, betrays every bandit relying on him for security, and gets robbed. He never throws a single punch. He never draws his weapon. He just stands there, lighter in every possible way. He carries less unique loot than almost any other named bandit leader in the entire game. No interesting gear, no journal entries revealing some tragic backstory, nothing. The community doesn't debate Horlak theories or share clips of wild Horlak encounters. They forget he exists. He's not even a villain. He's a locked door that opened itself. And honestly, that's exactly why he's first on this list. His failure is so clean, so quiet, so utterly devoid of drama that it almost feels respectful. No chaos, no spectacle, just dignified irrelevance. But if you think being bribed and pickpocketed is embarrassing, wait until you meet a guy whose entire identity is built around speed he absolutely does not have. Arvel the Swift. Let's talk about the first villain most Skyrim players ever meet. And by villain, I mean a guy dangling from a spider web like a fly in a kitchen window, screaming for help. Arvel the Swift is a Dunmer thief you find in Bleak Falls Barrow, wrapped up in webbing and begging you to cut him loose. He's got the golden claw, he knows you need it, and he promises to help you if you just get him down. Standard deal. You kill the giant spider, slice through the web, and the second his feet touch the ground, he hits you with one of the most audacious betrayal speeches in gaming history. You fool! They tricked you, and then he runs. Here's the thing, he doesn't make it. Not even close. A brand new character, fresh off the prisoner cart from Helgen, wearing whatever garbage armor you scrape together in the first 20 minutes of the game, catches this man in roughly 20 feet, sometimes less. He bolts down a cave corridor with the confidence of someone who has clearly never been chased before, and the Dragonborn just casually jogs up behind him and ends his entire career with an iron sword. But the real comedy here is the name, Arvel the Swift. The game calls him this completely straight-faced. There's no wink, no irony, no hidden joke in the game files. Bethesda just named this man the Swift, and then gave him the foot speed of a shopping cart with a broken wheel. He earns his title the same way a 6'2" guy gets nicknamed Tiny. Except those nicknames are usually jokes, Arvel's isn't. The game genuinely presents him as a capable thief who happens to have the athletic ability of a wet napkin, and that's what makes him perfect. He's not memorable because he's dangerous. He's memorable because he's Skyrim's first lesson in villain management. Sometimes the enemy gives a dramatic speech, turns to run, and immediately dies. Maximum swagger, zero follow-through. The confidence to competence gap on this man is genuinely legendary. But if you think Arvel's job title was misleading, wait until you meet the bandit whose literal job description is physically impossible for him to perform. Ulfur the Blind. Let me set the scene for you. You're approaching White River Watch, a small bandit cave just outside Whiterun. The gang inside is led by Hajvar Ironhand, a reasonably competent bandit chief who runs a tight operation. And guarding the entrance to this operation, serving as the first line of defense, the eyes and ears of the entire crew, is Hajvar's uncle Ulfur. Ulfur is blind, not has poor vision, not struggles in low light. The man cannot see. His name is literally Ulfur the Blind. And his job, his one assigned role in this bandit organization, is to watch the door, a lookout who cannot look out, a sentry who cannot sense. Bethesda didn't even try to hide the joke. They put it right there in his name and let it breathe. Here's the thing. Despite being fundamentally incapable of performing the only task he was given, Ulfur apparently held his post for a long time. The bandits inside knew he was blind. They talked about it, but nobody removed him from his position because he was the boss's uncle. Hajvar kept him there out of family loyalty, and the rest of the crew went along with it because telling your leader that his uncle is dead weight at the front door is a career-ending conversation in a bandit cave. But here's where it gets even better. If you sneak into White River Watch and listen to the bandits deeper inside, you'll hear them openly plotting to overthrow Hajvar. They're sick of his leadership, sick of his decisions, and presumably sick of walking past a blind man every day who's supposed to be protecting them. The gang is falling apart from the inside, and Ulfr, he doesn't get taken out by the Dragonborn in some dramatic fight. He gets caught up in the internal faction disputes. The man survived being the worst century in Tamriel's history, only to be done in by office politics. His failure wasn't even his own. He was just a blind guy sitting in a chair, doing his best at a job he literally could not do, until his coworkers sorted it out amongst themselves. Some fans frame Ulfr as a dark metaphor for nepotism in criminal organizations, legacy hires getting positions they're not qualified for because of who they know. And sure, that reading works, but the funnier interpretation is simpler. Nobody wanted to be the guy who told a blind old man he was fired from door duty, so they just let it happen, every single day. But if you think a blind lookout is the peak of incompetent villainy, wait until you meet a mage whose ambitions outweigh his abilities by roughly 1,000 to 1, the novice conjurer. Some villains fail because they're unlucky, some fail because they're outmatched, and then there's this guy, who fails because he looked at his own abilities, looked at his goals, and somehow saw zero problems. Near Sleeping Tree Camp, you can find an unnamed conjurer mage with a plan so ambitious it loops back around to being sad. His goal? Raise an undead army and march on Whiterun. Not a bandit camp, not a small settlement. Whiterun, one of the most populated, most fortified, most guard-heavy cities in all of Skyrim. The city with walls, towers, and an entire standing military garrison that regularly fights off giant attacks for fun, and his magical rank? Novice. Let me explain what that means. In Skyrim's conjuration system, Novice is the absolute bottom. It's the starting line. It's the magical equivalent of picking up a sword for the first time and deciding you're ready to invade a country. A novice conjurer can summon weak, temporary thralls that struggle against basic enemies. We're talking about undead that get bullied by wolves. Undead that a single Whiterun guard would cut through without breaking stride. The gap between this man's ambitions and his actual power level is not a gap. It is an abyss. It's like a kid with a slingshot drawing up invasion plans for a military base and genuinely believing it'll work. He didn't just want power in some abstract, vague way. He had a specific target. He picked Whiterun on a map, looked at his wobbly little zombie friends, and thought, yeah, this is the one. Here's the thing. Even if you removed the Dragonborn from the equation entirely, this plan was never happening. His zombie army would have had to cross the open plains of Whiterun Hold, where every guard patrol, every wandering companion, and every giant with a club the size of a tree trunk would have had a clear line of sight on his little undead parade. They wouldn't have made it to the gates. They probably wouldn't have made it past the first watchtower. In practice, any prepared player kills him in seconds. He's not a boss fight. He's barely an encounter. The community loves him for exactly this reason. He's not evil in a threatening way. He's evil in a complete inability to accurately assess his own situation way. Fans describe him as evil in its most confident, most doomed form. Pure delusion, zero self-awareness, and an ambition so wildly disconnected from reality that you almost respect the commitment. At least his plan required some magical ability, though. The next villain on our list tried to pull off a robbery with nothing but a tree and bad positioning. The Tree Bridge Bandit. This might be the funniest death in all of Skyrim, and the best part is, it happens to the guy who was supposed to be the threat. South of Hilgrun's tomb, there's an unmarked location where a massive fallen tree stretches across a gorge with river rapids churning below. It's genuinely intimidating terrain, and sitting on this tree, claiming it as his personal toll bridge, is a bandit who has exactly one move. He threatens to push you off the edge if you come any closer. Here's the thing. On paper, this is actually a solid setup. Narrow bridge, lethal fall, no way around. The bandit has the high ground, the psychological advantage, and the terrain working in his favor. For once, a random bandit in Skyrim has picked a location that actually makes tactical sense. But Skyrim's physics engine did not get the memo. What happens in practice is one of the most reliable pieces of slapstick comedy the game has ever produced. Players across the community report the same thing over and over. The bandit delivers his big threat, maybe draws his weapon, takes a step forward, and then just slides right off the tree. No dramatic battle. No heroic last stand. Just a man. A slippery log, and gravity doing what gravity does. Sometimes he falls mid-sentence. Sometimes he makes it to combat and then loses his footing during his first swing. Sometimes he doesn't even get the thread out before the tree decides his time is up. The terrain that was supposed to be his greatest weapon becomes the only enemy he ever faces, and he loses every single time. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Nobody can agree on whether Bethesda did this on purpose. Some players insist this is intentional environmental comedy, a deliberate joke baked into an unmarked location for explorers to stumble upon. Others argue it's just Skyrim being Skyrim, the same engine that launches giants into orbit simply applying its chaotic physics to a bandit standing on a curved surface. And honestly, both explanations make it funnier. Either the developers specifically designed a bandit whose entire purpose is to embarrass himself, or the game organically created a perfect comedy sketch without anyone at Bethesda planning it. He represents something uniquely Skyrim. Not a villain defeated by the Dragonborn, not a schemer undone by his own ambition, just a guy who picked the most dramatic possible stage, delivered the most dramatic possible line, and then got absolutely destroyed by the floor he was standing on. But if a bandit losing a fight to a tree is embarrassing, wait until you meet the guy who built an entire fake military identity and still couldn't pull off his plan. Captain Valmir. The Thalmor are supposed to be the most dangerous intelligence network in Tamriel, highly trained agents, political manipulation on a continental scale, and a spy apparatus that infiltrated every major government in the Empire. And then there's Captain Valmir, who built an entire covert operation around the assumption that nobody would look at his face. Here's the setup. Valmir is a Thalmor agent camped outside Forelhost, a dragon cult stronghold high in the mountains. His mission is to trick the player into clearing the dungeon and retrieving the dragon priest mask, Ragod. To pull this off, he disguises himself as either a Stormcloak officer or an Imperial soldier, depending on which faction the player is aligned with. That's actually clever. Dynamically adjusting your cover story based on your target's known allegiances is legitimate spycraft. But here's the problem. Valmir is a high elf. High elves do not serve as field officers in the Stormcloaks. The Stormcloaks are literally fighting a war against the Thalmor, who are almost entirely high elves. That's like a Soviet agent trying to infiltrate the CIA during the Cold War by showing up in a Russian military uniform and saying, "Hello, fellow Americans." And the Imperial Legion isn't much better. You don't see Altmer captains running solo operations in the frozen mountains of Skyrim. Players report clocking the deception before Valmir even opens his mouth. You walk up to this camp, see a lone high elf in faction armor sitting by a fire in the middle of nowhere, and immediately know something is wrong. The truly painful part is that everything else about his plan actually works. He has the right uniform. He has convincing dialogue. He adapts his story in real time. The man put genuine effort into every single detail of this operation except the one detail that matters most, which is that he is visibly, obviously, unmistakably a Thalmor agent. It's like forging a perfect fake ID and then writing your real name on it. And when the player returns from the dungeon, Valmir drops the act and attacks. A Thalmor intelligence operative, alone, in the snow, picking a fight with the Dragonborn who just single-handedly killed a dragon priest. He dies in seconds. The entire operation, the planning, the disguise, the faction research, all of it ends with a dead elf and 0 results. Players love pointing to Valmir as the perfect example of how the Thalmor operate across all of Skyrim. Brilliant on paper, meticulous in preparation, and completely undone by their own arrogance, because they genuinely cannot fathom that anyone would be smart enough to notice the obvious. Valmir didn't fail because he was stupid. He failed because he assumed everyone else was. But if you think a botched disguise is embarrassing, wait until you meet the guy lurking in Riften sewers who somehow made even less of an impression. The Ratway Lunatic. Let's talk about Gan the Fist. And I want you to really sit with that name for a second. Gan the Fist. Somewhere in the Ratway, the sewer network beneath Riften, a man earned that title. And then someone in the Thieves Guild looked at him and said, "Yeah, put him on checkpoint duty." That's the real story here. Gan is stationed in the Ratway as a kind of obstacle for anyone trying to reach the Thieves Guild headquarters. He's supposed to be a deterrent, a gatekeeper, the first line of defense for one of Skyrim's most storied criminal organizations. And he is, by every possible metric, completely unfit for the job. The guy is universally described as mentally unstable, not eccentric, not unpredictable in a useful way. Unstable. He's a lunatic swinging fists in a sewer, and the Thieves Guild apparently looked at their roster and decided this was the best candidate to screen incoming visitors. Here's the thing, he's not even hard to beat. A fresh character with an iron dagger can take him down. A stealth build can walk past him like he doesn't exist. He is a locked door where someone left the key taped to the handle. But the real comedy isn't Gon himself. It's what Gon tells you about the Thieves Guild under Mercer Frey's leadership. This is an organization that was once feared across all of Skyrim. Maven Blackbriar relied on them. Merchants paid protection money. The guild had reach, influence, and reputation. And by the time you show up, their security checkpoint is a deranged man in a tunnel. That's not a villain failing at his plan. That's an organization failing at everything. Gan didn't choose this role. Someone assigned it to him. Someone in the guild's chain of command evaluated their available personnel and concluded that a visibly unwell brawler was the right person to represent their first impression to outsiders. That decision tells you more about the state of the Thieves Guild than any quest dialogue ever could. Players bring Gan up constantly in discussions about the guild's institutional decay during this period, and rightfully so. He's the canary in the coal mine. He's proof that Mercer Frey had scraped so far down the recruitment barrel that the barrel didn't have a bottom anymore. And here's the part that really gets me. The game barely acknowledges Gan exists. He has almost zero unique documentation. No backstory, no journal entries, no grand motivation. He's so minor that the game itself couldn't be bothered to flesh him out, which is honestly perfect. His entire narrative function is to be forgettable opposition, and Bethesda committed to that bit harder than they've committed to most of their actual questlines. Gan the Fist isn't a failed villain because he lost. He's a failed villain because his assignment was the failure. He's the answer to a question nobody should have had to ask. What happens when a criminal empire runs out of competent people? But if you think a collapsing organization is embarrassing, wait until you see a bandit gang that tears itself apart from the inside over a ghost story. The Frostmere Crypt Gang. Every other entry on this list is about one person failing, one guy with a bad plan, one mage with delusions of grandeur, one bandit who couldn't see. But the Frostmere Crypt Gang? This is an entire criminal organization collapsing at every single level simultaneously. And honestly, it might be the most impressive failure in all of Skyrim. Let's start with the basics. A group of roughly 8 to 12 bandits set up their base of operations inside Frostmere Crypt. A crypt, a place where dead people are buried. Already, not a great sign. But it gets worse, because this particular crypt happens to be haunted by a supernatural entity known as the Pale Lady, a spectral figure that drifts through the halls and feeds on fear. So the leadership looked at a freezing tomb full of restless spirits and thought, yeah, this is where we build our empire. But here's where it gets really dark. The journals you find scattered throughout the crypt tell a story that's almost tragic in how predictable it is. Two members, Isa and Rajir, are actively planning a mutiny against the chieftain. They're writing about it, openly, in journals that anyone could pick up and read. Meanwhile, the chieftain is completely fixated on looting the crypt's deeper chambers, apparently oblivious to the fact that half the gang is ready to slit his throat. And the Pale Lady? She didn't even need to fight them. She just existed. Her presence alone was enough to shatter whatever fragile loyalty held this group together. Members started refusing to go into certain sections of the crypt. When comrades fell or went missing, nobody went to look for them. The superstition spread like a disease, and one by one, bandits either defected, broke mentally, or simply vanished into the dark. The chieftain's response to all of this was genuinely fascinating in its incompetence. He installed trap systems throughout the crypt, which tells you he knew something was wrong, but every single trap was designed to stop external threats, raiders, adventurers, rival gangs. He was so paranoid about enemies coming from outside that he completely missed the fact that his organization was eating itself alive from within. Rajir eventually stole the chieftain's own sword, believing it was connected to the Pale Lady's power, and that act of desperation basically detonated whatever was left of the gang's structure. Nobody invaded Frostmere Crypt. Nobody sieged it. No rival faction came knocking. The gang simply imploded through a perfect storm of terrible real estate decisions, supernatural psychological warfare, unchecked mutiny, and a leader who thought the answer to every problem was more loot and more traps. The Pale Lady almost deserves credit here. She didn't raise an army. She didn't cast devastating spells. She just haunted a crypt and let human nature do the rest. Fear, greed, paranoia, and zero leadership did all the work for her. She's less of a villain and more of a passive observer watching a group of criminals speedrun their own extinction. It's the kind of failure that doesn't belong to any single person. It's institutional, structural. Every layer of this organization was rotten, and the collapse was inevitable from the moment they unpacked their bedrolls in a haunted tomb. But if you think a group failure is bad, wait until you meet someone who failed so spectacularly at revenge that her own target couldn't even be bothered to care. Ildari Sarathril. This one's different. Every villain on this list so far failed because of stupidity, incompetence, or laughably bad planning. Ildari Sarathril failed because the universe simply did not care about her, and honestly, she might not even be a villain. Here's her story. Ildari was a Dunmer mage, an apprentice to the Telvanni wizard Neloth on Solstheim. If you've met Neloth, you know exactly what kind of person he is. Arrogant, dismissive, treats everyone around him like furniture that occasionally talks too much. Ildari worked under this man, assisted his research, and one day Neloth decided to experiment with heartstones. The experiment went wrong. Ildari died on his table, not in battle, not because she made a mistake, not because she was reckless. She died because her master used her as a test subject and it killed her. But here's where it gets complicated. The same heartstone procedure that ended her life also brought her back. The very experiment Neloth botched accidentally resurrected her. The man who killed her gave her the power to return, and she came back angry. Can you blame her? Ildari spent weeks, possibly months, clawing her way back to strength. She gathered an army of ash spawn. She set magical traps across Solstheim. She built an entire indirect revenge campaign targeting Neloth, attacking his home, disrupting his research, threatening everything he cared about. By villain standards, she did the work. She planned. She prepared. She committed to the bit harder than almost anyone else on this list. And Neloth's response when he finds out his dead apprentice has returned from the grave to wage war against him? He calls her an annoyance not worth his time. That's it. That's the whole reaction. He doesn't confront her. He doesn't express guilt or shock or even mild concern. He acknowledges that she has real power, and then he sends the Dragonborn to go handle it, like a chore, like taking out the trash. Her entire resurrection, her months of preparation, her army, her traps, her rage, all of it gets reduced to a side quest, dispatched by someone who found her less interesting than whatever mushroom he was studying that afternoon. Ildari doesn't get a final confrontation with the man who killed her. She gets a quest marker. The community is genuinely split on this one, and rightfully so. A lot of players argue Ildari isn't a villain at all. She was wronged. She had a legitimate grievance. She was killed by someone who treated her life as expendable, and when she came back demanding accountability, she was swatted aside by pure indifference. Some players feel genuinely bad fighting her. Others point out that raising an undead army and terrorizing an entire island crosses a line regardless of your backstory. But the real tragedy isn't whether Ildari was right or wrong, it's that it didn't matter either way. She could have been the most justified person in Tamriel, and Neloth still wouldn't have looked up from his desk. Her entire revenge arc, from death to resurrection to build-up to final stand, was defeated not by superior power or clever strategy, but by a man who simply could not be bothered to care. Every other villain on this list failed because of what they did. Ildari failed because of what she meant to her enemy. Nothing. But if you think being destroyed by indifference is the worst way a Skyrim villain can go out, wait until you meet the man who built his own eternal prison and locked himself inside it. Malyn Varen. Every villain on this list failed because something went wrong. A bad plan. A stupid mistake. An enemy they didn't see coming. Malyn Varen is different. Malyn Varen failed because everything went right. Here's his story. Malyn was a mage at the College of Winterhold, and he got himself expelled. Now, keep in mind, the College of Winterhold tolerates a remarkable amount of dangerous magic. They let students summon Daedra in the courtyard. They let a Thalmor agent wander the halls unchecked. They have an entire wing dedicated to experiments that have literally torn holes in reality. Getting kicked out of the College of Winterhold is like getting banned from a bar that doesn't have a last call. You have to really, truly commit to crossing a line. Malyn crossed it. His crime was illegal soul gem experimentation, and his goal was the oldest goal in the book, immortality. But unlike most villains who chase immortality through vague rituals or half-baked schemes, Malyn actually did the research. He studied Azura's star, one of the most powerful Daedric artifacts in existence, a soul gem that could be used infinitely. He discovered that black souls, the souls of sapient beings like humans and elves, couldn't normally be stored inside it, so he spent years, possibly decades, modifying the artifact to accept them. Painstaking, methodical, Brilliant work. And then he used it on himself. Malin captured his own soul inside the modified star, anchoring his consciousness to an artifact that could never be destroyed by conventional means. His body died, but his soul persisted. Immortality. Actual, functional, verified immortality. On paper, Malin Varen is the most successful villain on this entire list. He set a goal, built a plan, executed it flawlessly, and achieved the exact result he wanted. But here's where it gets dark. He trapped himself. Completely. His soul survived inside Azura's star, conscious and aware, but with no body, no freedom, no ability to interact with the world, and absolutely no exit. He built himself an eternal prison and locked the door from the inside. The immortality he spent his entire life chasing turned out to be an infinite loop of existence, with zero of the benefits he was actually after. No power, no influence, no sensation, just awareness, forever. And it gets worse. Extended contact with the corrupted artifact had already driven him insane long before the Dragonborn ever shows up. So, by the time you're sent inside the star to deal with him, Malin isn't some calculating mastermind defending his creation. He's a raving, broken shell of a mage, lashing out at anything that enters his domain. Trapped, mad, and completely incapable of understanding what he did to himself. The Dragonborn kills him inside the star, destroys his soul in the very artifact he spent his life's work modifying, dispatched inside the monument to his own genius. The thing he built to make himself eternal is the exact thing that made him nothing, and that's what makes Malin the perfect closer for this list. Every other villain we've talked about failed because their plan fell apart. Something broke, something backfired, something they didn't account for ruined everything. Malin's plan didn't fall apart. It worked perfectly, exactly as designed, and the result was the worst possible outcome anyway. He didn't fail to achieve immortality. He achieved it and discovered that immortality without freedom, without sanity, without a body, without purpose, is just a fancy word for eternal suffering. His success is his failure. They're the same thing. There's something uniquely Skyrim about that. You can spend years researching forbidden magic, get expelled from the one institution that would tolerate you, modify a Daedric artifact through sheer intellectual force, successfully capture your own soul in an indestructible vessel, and your reward is going insane inside a gem until some random adventurer walks in and deletes you. Every villain in this game builds an elaborate scheme, and every single one ends up as a footnote in somebody else's quest log. Malin just did it with more style than the rest. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the best quests in Skyrim explained, click the video on the screen now.